Hello everyone, welcome to another series of the IMPRINT Explained, and today we're looking at another 2019 COVID controversy, and the question is obviously, should China be held accountable for COVID 2019? And there has been a recent change in government now having a mandatory note for FDI from neighboring countries. So we first cover that, and then we look at on experts talking about how US should basically hold China accountable, and maybe even India, right? Let's see. Okay, so government note is now mandatory for FDI from neighboring countries, and that has been the big news yesterday and day before, right? The reason why this was done was people basically said it was because of HDFC, right? So what happened, What happened was HDFC announced that from Jan to March, they increased the stock exchange limit, right? The stake by the People Bank of China now holds 1% in HDFC. Now remember, HDFC is one of the big firms in our banking system. Therefore, obviously, now this is being seen as a threat. Now, on the other hand, if you think about what about the unicorns, okay, so that remember the fact that whether it's Snapdeal, whether it's Ola, whether it's Paytm, whether it's Big Basket, Zomato, all these companies which we think are Indian, right, are actually having very, very large funding from the Chinese. And actually, you can think of Paytm as being a Chinese company, or Swiggy being a Chinese company, or Ola being a Chinese company rather than an Indian firm. So what Center basically has done in a move that will restrict Chinese investments, Center has made prior government approval mandatory for select direct investments of countries which share a land border with India. So very interestingly, they have still kept out the black money heavens, right, of Mauritius, round-tripping heavens of Mauritius, where black is converted to white in India. Only previously what used to happen, only investments from Pakistan and Bangladesh face such restrictions. Now, obviously, this has been done to curb opportunistic takeovers, acquisitions of Indian companies due to the current COVID pandemic. Because remember, a few months ago, our Sensex for 40,000. Now it is around 31. So 10,000 points has dropped. So now, obviously, anybody who has a lot of deep pockets would like to come in and buy a lot of shares. Now, let's look at the editorial. Then after the article, there were a couple of editorials and a couple of news. So this is the editorial in the Hindu, and it talks about the article. The headline is saying takeover fears, right? So it says that this decision actually has raised a few eyebrows. Okay, why? Because it is basically aimed at a Chinese investor who would exploit cheaper valuations in the depressed economic conditions post-lockdown to pick up equity stake in select companies. And India is saying that it is not just us, it is Italy, Spain, France, Australia have already taken similar action to protect their businesses from Chinese investors or foreign investors, right? Because remember, investors right now, distressed entities are in the need of cash in the post-COVID scenario. Now, the question comes, how much investment? We talked about Snapdeal, Ola, Flipkart, partially, right? So many companies having Chinese investment. Now, so Paytm, Swiggy, Ola, Zomato, Big Basket, right? So, remember, Chinese investment in India has been on an up curve in the last 5 years. Brookings in their study, they say that total and planned investment by Chinese entities is over 26 billion. Right, and this is not just in brick and mortar industries. It is fintech startups, technological startups. Alibaba owns a lot of chunk of Paytm. Tencent, right, owns a lot of other firms as well. So now the question becomes: is it because of COVID, or we wanted to do it for a very long time? Okay, so the article says it is quite possible that a move to curb or control Chinese investment in Indian companies has always been on the cards, and it is just an excuse. ठीक है कि ये तो सिर्फ बहाना है, हमें करना ही था, चाइना को बाहर निकालना ही था इंडियन कंपनीज से, right? And I think in some time it might even be that you are not allowed to have Chinese investment. So there has been unease that that divides the thin line, right? Because the problem is the state sector is very, very involved or committed to the public sector there, right? So private and public enterprise, there's very thin line, and there's linkages with the security apparatus of that country. So there's a huge problem. What about other issues? Now the question is, why only China? So what the article says is that greenfield investment should have been kept out of the purview, as they do not pose a threat of takeover. So if somebody wants to do a direct FDI, that should have been allowed. Okay, then there should have been distinctions made on the basis of what kind of investors are there, right? Venture capital funds, obviously, and financial investors, they need not obviously be interested in taking over and running a business, so that might have been allowed, right? FDI route has been plugged, but what about the FII, right? Now, what SEBI has done is that already sent out missives to custodians asking details of Chinese holdings in listed entities. Will this be regulated? That is something to be debated upon, because FII, I think, is much more serious than FDI. At the end of the day, FDI is a very large stake, right? So people will not run away with the money, but FII, people will run away with the money as soon as the stock exchange is going down or they feel India is not doing that well. So what happens to FDI that comes through entities not registered, that do not share a land border? Remember, there is a lot of companies who have Chinese holdings, but controlled by Chinese, but are actually located in elsewhere. Now, but the wall has been raised, and approval should be quick for investments proposed in the technology startup space, where cash is often high, and obviously there's a need for high cash burn, and obviously existing investors are tapped for top-up investment. Now, what does China say? China says, there's something wrong. These additional barriers set up by the Indian side for investors for specific countries violate the WTO principle of non-discrimination. And this is against the general trend of liberalization, facilitation of trade, and investment. And it does not conform to the consensus of the G20 leaders and trade ministers to realize a free, fair, non-discriminatory, transparent, predictable, stable trade and investment environment. Okay, so what he's saying is that we already have investment above 8 billion in key sectors such as telecom, infrastructure, automobiles, right? MG Hector is a very loved car in India. Household goods, also a lot of Chinese goods. So I don't think so. He's saying it's not really advisable you do this, right? What this article also says that it is understood that Indian decision was in response to the news of an incremental purchase of shares in HDFC by the People Bank of China. So that is what has spooked India. Now let's look at something very different. Okay, now one of the conspiracy theories that has been happening is that the coronavirus came from a Wuhan lab, right? That has been so a laboratory at ground zero of the global COVID outbreak has rejected US theories that it has spawned the epidemic. The denial came as the world was debating whether there was any issues, right? Whether actually, there's some conspiracy theories going around. Remember, US has now more than 1 million cases, more than 40,000 deaths. So obviously, what Trump is saying is something very different. He's saying, okay, we are investigating whether China is knowingly responsible for the COVID pandemic. If it was a mistake is a mistake. But if they're knowingly responsible, there would be consequences. And this is what Trump is saying in his nonchalant ways. Now, Trump and his senior aides have sharply criticized China for a lack of transparency after coronavirus outbreak happened in Wuhan. This week, he suspended aid to WHO for accusing it to be China-centric. He called the virus China virus, right? So they have been sparring publicly over this virus now. Initially, Trump had praised China's response to the outbreak, right? And now he has totally changed up his rhetoric, right? Because remember, it's election year. Trump also raised questions about a Wuhan virology laboratory that Fox News this week reported that had likely, developed the coronavirus as a part of the China's effort to demonstrate its capacity to identify and combat viruses. And obviously, Trump is saying the government is seeking to determine whether the virus emanated from the China lab, right? The China lab actually has totally denied it. He said nothing doing, we ever didn't, right? This is nothing to do with us, okay, right? Trump again also said that, you're not being transparent. You now have increased the death toll by 1,300 people in the city of Wuhan, right? It is as if, you're not telling us what actually happened during the corona period in China. What is the other parts of the world, what they're saying? They're saying there's accountability needed. China has failed to close its wet market. So even after the SARS outbreak, right? These wet markets where there's a lot of, animal products which can be sold outside, right? These are the cause of the basic virus. And it failed to also inform the new dangerous virus in Wuhan. And initial cover-up is what actually led to the virus being spread beyond Wuhan and spill across international waters. And obviously US said we will highlight China's misstep through open sources of information, especially our media institution, academic research, right? And in particular, investigative journalism, academic researchers should analyze China's official data on infections and deaths, and because there's a lot of underreporting. Okay, I think a lot of people are saying there are more than 10 lakh deaths. Some people are saying there are more than 2 million deaths that happened in China. There's no real news. So there's data that the number of telephone users dropped in China by 2 million. Okay, so that kind of tells you, okay, these people don't have money or they just died. Okay, but some of them might have died at least. So we highlight so the institutional and regulatory failures that led to delay in reporting and to the punishment of whistleblowers, activists, journalists, which continues to this. So they're saying that because of lack of democracy, that is the reason this virus actually increased, because media outlets outside China should continue to highlight the censorship, repression, information control, and this lack of independent voices. This is what made sure that the virus was not, there was not enough talk about it, right? And this is a strong pushback because, right, previously, people were okay with doing business with China, right, despite it being a dictatorial country. Now, what about China's response? Now, China's, obviously wants to grab the mantle of the global leadership, right? But what is happening? It is obviously falling flat on its face. Its propaganda has gone from pathetic to laughable. Okay. The thing is that obviously the main crux of the consensus of the world is that China should not be allowed to ride to the finish line on the spikes of the very virus it helped unleash and imprison the world. Okay, what people are saying that with the rest everybody else is lockdown and China is again, Chinese factories are really working. So obviously, will they actually lead to China becoming the victor of this overall scenario? So some in the West and in India declared China the winner the moment it claimed it had controlled the coronavirus. They were admiring obviously this because of the United States was struggling in its response. Okay, so they praised China's mask philanthropy and bemoaned American helplessness, right? But Chinese company, what they did was they started making masks, protective gear, and selling them to Europe and Asia. And obviously, it was a way to capture international goodwill, right? But what happened? Remember, Chinese goods are Chinese goods, right? They basically are just fake goods. That is the basic problem. Okay, the mask its state-supported companies are selling and are not donating don't protect the doctors. A test kits produce false results from Spain to Italy to Czech Republic to Turkey to Netherlands. हर जगह, चाहे Spain हो, चाहे Italy हो, चाहे Czech Republic हो, चाहे Netherlands हो, everywhere governments are outraged. They bought a lot of masks. They feel that they're not useful, right? They bought test kits. They're not working well. So they're saying thanks, but no thanks, right? Medical supplies from China have been ramped up, but they do not work, just like Chinese plastic toys, right? But the problem is toys don't harm people, but these goods do. And this, obviously, these people are in the front line of battles, these doctors. So obviously, the global leadership, nobody can claim to be a global leader if they do that. And message from doctors are heartbreaking. Faulty kits on the top of endless shifts is China's gifts. That is what they're saying. Okay, and 80% of kids, right, gave false results in Spain, and it is now a major hotspot after Italy. Now, what does the British government do? See, this says that China faces a movement of reckoning and risks becoming a pariah state. So China को सब लोग ना basically ऐसे untouchable declare कर देंगे in some time, right? जैसे इंडिया में SC/STs के साथ नहीं करते, वैसे करेंगे. So Italians are furious with China's disinformation campaign trying to shift the blame on them, right? Now, the Italians obviously had of the virus of the strain. This came after Chinese claim that US Army spread the virus. Now, the problem is that, first they were saying that the US aircraft carrier carried it. Now they're saying the Italians carried it. Now, the idea is that they're really, really unhappy, okay? Because you can't say that, because you can't lie to countries, right? And that is a problem. So diplomats are supposed to lie, and that's fine, but Chinese, ambassadors and state media are breaking records. Now, it is time that China is held accountable, and I think there has to be a long-term strategy how everybody decides how to punish China. There has to be very, very strong sanctions against China from the rest of the world, and that's a must, right? Questions must be raised, right? China has to be forced to give up information upon this virus. They have to come clean what exactly happened. If not, then obviously there's time that we stop China being the major supplier in the world, one factory cannot be the source of all the supplies in the world, and that's for sure. I think this will definitely change. And even our PM has talked about this fact that yes, we will become the factory of the world as soon as this pandemic is over. Now, the other thing is that the concept of globalization will be examined. Supply chains where China can hold the world hostage for life-saving ingredients for medicines in times of pandemics should be reassessed. The decision to allow 5G, right, China UI, right, becomes all the more crucial. Now, obviously, European eyes are wide open. Do governments want China to have control over next generation networks apart from the physical control they already exercise through supply chains? Cheap socks and t-shirts and other things, but essential medicines, right, communication infrastructure are quite another. And the corporate greed to save pennies on widgets and screws by going to China will have to be addressed. Now, this is something that has to be there. Some economic distancing may be necessary. US and Europe have to come together and lead the rest. And there's an opportunity of an idea of a new life in a rule-based world and a democratic world for that sake. Thank you so much for listening. Do subscribe and like. Do let us know what do you think, how China should be held accountable. What do you think, right?